I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Norm Farrell. He's a longtime blogger on public affairs. I'm sure you've read several of his articles. Norm, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's good to be talking to you.
Norman, the big thing that's happened in BC is this report on the Site C dam. Either complete it, freeze it, or restore the property back to its original state. Whatever they do, it's going to cost us billions of dollars on top of the $2 billion already spent. What do you think they should do with this hydro development in northeastern BC?
Well, I think the second BCUC report has narrowed the options to two, and one is to proceed with it, and the second is to cancel it. My reading of the report, which I spent much of yesterday looking at, is that it's politely couched in a lot of bureaucratic terminology and so on, but that they're really saying that they've blown out of the water a lot of BC Hydro's justifications for the project. For example, the BC Hydro has been creating demand estimations for the next 20 years, and for about a decade or so, perhaps even more, those estimates have been totally incorrect. They've been forecasting substantial growth in the demand for power, and yet if you look at their domestic sales, as I did, the demand has not changed, has not increased in over a dozen years. I looked, for example, at the 3-year period ended in 2007, and BC Hydro sold more power to industrial, commercial, and residential consumers in BC than it sold in the 3 years that are ended June 2017. So that's a considerable period of time to go by with no demand increase. And if you look at other jurisdictions in North America, there's a similar experience. It's partly driven by the deindustrialization of North America, but it's also driven by the increased efficiencies of power consumers. And I think we've experienced that in British Columbia, where the call for power by individual consumers is substantially less than it's stayed the same. Individuals, I guess the per capita use has decreased, but the total, as the population expands, the total has gone up. So the demand situation is one of the problems. BCUC also reported that hydro had the capacity or the ability to increase capacity in existing facilities, such as the Mica Dam and the Revelstoke Dam and others. But in addition, they have the province has the ability to bring back the Canadian entitlement under the Columbia River Treaty, which is actually a capacity amount that's larger than Site C. And because we don't need it in the province, it's being sold, and I think the last reported year it was sold for 2.6 cents a kilowatt hour, which is perhaps a third to a quarter of what Site C will cost. So there's a whole bunch of other options. It's my belief that the decision to go ahead with Site C without any independent oversight was a huge mistake, and it's going to cost us billions of dollars to do that. but it's still cheaper than going and finishing the projects.
Yes, every year we get more efficient. I remember back in the 90s, they had the rolling blackouts in California, and they said if people had just all switched to flat screen computers in California, that would have gone away. And of course now we all have flat screens, our fridges, our stoves, everything is much more efficient electrically. And I think people are also using more solar power, even if it's not official. Like all their outdoor lighting now is solar powered. They don't have to be on the grid for it.
Sure. I think you have to recall, though, that those rolling blackouts that we remember in California were a man-made event because the market was being manipulated to drive the prices up. BC benefited at that time partly by selling power into the U.S. markets at incredibly high prices. And, of course, the famous company at the center of that scheme was Enron, which ultimately disappeared, and some of its executives went to jail.
So if Site C isn't on, BC could look after its electrical needs, even if electrical cars become an everyday fact of life?
Absolutely. You know, as I mentioned previously, that we used less power in the 3 years leading into 2017 than we did in the 3 years leading up to 2007. But the fact is that we've been increasing our purchases of private power from the independent power producers, and that's created surpluses that we're now selling outside the province at prices that have ranged basically between 0 and 4 cents a kilowatt hour. The average has been about 3 cents a kilowatt hour, and yet we're buying that private power from the independent producers at an average of over 9 cents a kilowatt hour. So we've committed ourselves to make these purchases. Some of those private power arrangements go out as far as 2075. So it's unlikely that we can do anything about that, but that's a huge burden on ratepayers, and it's creating surplus power that we have no need for. And to bring Site C on stream, or to do any of these other capacity increases at Hydro's existing facilities, would just increase surplus power that we can't sell at a profit, at least.
We'll have more with Norman Farrell right after the break.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Glance Technologies owns and operates Glance Pay, a disruptive mobile payment technology now live in 16 cities in Canada and about to launch in the U.S. With revenues up 664% in the last quarter, Glance Technologies has the potential to be a worldwide leader in an industry projected to grow to $1.3 trillion in 3 years. Glance Technologies stock symbols are GLNFF in the U.S. and GET in Canada. Find out more at glancepay.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Norm Farrell. Norm, is there a concern that the NDP government will kill jobs in British Columbia, or will it be business as usual?
I think they're going to be pragmatists in this, in the management of the economy. I think we've had a fairly lengthy period of job growth. My fear is that much of it has been driven by the real estate bubble that's been created. I know in the research that I've done, I can see that there's been a huge amount of borrowing by individuals who are taking equity out of their properties and then using it for renovating those properties, purchasing additional real estate assets, or even buying consumable goods, durable and non-durable consumer goods. So it's created this huge push on the economy, but it's a dangerous kind of arrangement where you have rising debt levels, that if the prices deflate, if interest rates rise, it's going to have a punishing effect on many of the individuals. And so I think the rapid growth that we've seen in the value of real estate in most of the urban areas of British Columbia is a kind of a dangerous style of growth to build the province on. And I have some fear as to what's going to result. But inevitably, there has to be a change to what we've experienced over the last 3 years, where the increase in values has just been almost ludicrous.
Well, New Zealand has banned foreign buyers of domestic real estate because they want to keep the prices down. Would that be a possible thing for BC to look at?
You know, I think the current government is a little bit nervous about making any kind of bold move that's going to impact on the price levels of property, because the potential side effects of that, the unintended consequences, could be quite severe to the economy. I don't know the situation in New Zealand terribly well, but I think we have one of the most acute situations of value increases here. And I was talking with somebody recently who just bought a fairly modest 3-bedroom condominium in North Vancouver, and they paid over $1 million for it. And it's actually a little bit smaller than the place that my wife and I bought back in 1972, which was our first home, which cost $16,900. So if you look at the difference between 1972 and 2017, I know it's a long period of time, but to go from a little under $17,000 to over $1 million is quite an incredible movement, and it's just not realistic to think we can sustain all of that.
One of my regular correspondents, Ross Kay, a real estate expert, has said if you want to control foreign ownership, it's not that you want to discourage people who, in many cases, need to move here. He says you don't tax the buyers, you tax foreign owners. So that makes them more responsible instead of them just buying it and then leaving it vacant.
Yeah, I think the vacancy situation certainly has the potential for social problems and other, again, the unintended consequences of having this occur. I did notice on the news in the last week a firefighter who was attending a large fire at a vacant home was indicating that this is a problem that's fairly widespread, that these homes that have nobody living in them are a danger in terms of fire, and they don't know what they're going to encounter when they arrive. And I guess that particular case turned out to be arson, but I've heard people talking about blocks in the west end or west side of Vancouver having houses that are largely empty, and these are incredibly valuable places. So it's a kind of a strange thing, but it certainly is disruptive to our pattern of living when we want to, in many parts of the cities, we're looking at increasing urban density, and yet we have large blocks where there's nobody living there at all.
Vancouver Mayor Robertson has suggested that the city restrict first dibs on real estate to people from the Lower Mainland. Constitutionally, how could he do that?
Yeah, I think there's a whole series of problems when you try and get into that kind of thing. We have looked, many years ago, we looked at the possibility of restricting ownership of recreational property because so much of it was being acquired by people who lived outside the country. I think that some jurisdictions have tried to do that, but people of British Columbia decided not to proceed in that way. And if they're going to maintain freedom of movement, freedom of economic choices, I think it's going to be very difficult. I think there's some possibility on vacancy taxes and so on that if people are living in properties and if we could impose, and I think Vancouver City's got this in the works, a tax on vacant properties to discourage that kind of thing. But, the way that prices have changed over time, that people, if you impose another $1,000 or $2,000 or $5,000 a year on their holding costs, it may not make much difference. So it's a complicated issue, and it's not one that I have any particular expertise in, but I think that the people that want to do something about it first have to decide that that is the case, that they truly want to do something about it. And then it has to be done with some caution. I had heard from a fairly good source, an individual placed in a high level one of the Canadian banks, that they expected, had the Liberals been re-elected in May of 2017, that the foreign buyers tax was going to disappear. That's the assurance that some of them had received, because the government saw the real estate market as so important to a continued growth in the overall economy. They didn't want to make much change to what was happening.
Well, Christy Clark, when she went to China, did take commercial real estate people with her, and that was her reasoning, saying, I'm not promoting the sale of homes. I took commercial. But if you look at a lot of properties around the Lower Mainland, the bottom 3 floors of the high-rise are commercial, and the top 30 floors are residential.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so it still ended up being residential.
Exactly.
We'll have more with Norm Farrell right after this.
Lotus Ventures, Inc. is a BC-based medical marijuana company poised to launch into the rapidly evolving cannabis sector. Lotus is in the final review stage of the Health Canada approvals to become a licensed producer, having arranged facility financing of up to $12 million, plus building permits for its prototype indoor production facility. Shares trade under the symbol J on the Canadian Securities Exchange. Visit our website at lotusventures.ca.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Norm Farrell. Norm, the changing face of education in BC after the BC or the Canadian Supreme Court ruled that the province had to honor their contract with the teachers that promised to keep teacher to classroom student ratios at a proper balance. That seems to have helped education, hasn't it?
The feedback that I'm receiving from people in education is that there has been an improvement in the classroom experience for school teachers, but there's still difficulties that are going to take a period of time to resolve. For example, when they increased the number of teachers that were working full time, that kind of depleted the pool of qualified people that were available for filling in for sickness and other needs that the school has for temporary replacements, and that's a problem. There's kind of a difficult situation where people that were employed in some of the more remote areas of the province, largely because jobs weren't available in the areas where they wanted to work, that there's been a bit of a migration away from some of those rural areas, and so it's created some difficulties there. There's more money going into the classroom, but there's still, I'm told, a shortage of special care workers and so on. When people with special needs who were once segregated years ago, they were segregated from the public school system, but now they're integrated, which I think overall is a positive thing. But that imposes a fair degree of burden on the school system. I was talking to a grade 2 school teacher who works in Vancouver. She told me that she had a severely autistic child in her classroom who isn't even toilet trained and so has to be dealt with by the school personnel. The other grade 2 teacher in her school has 22 students and 2 of them suffering autism. So you've got in that small sample 45 children around the age of 7 or 8 years of age, and 3 of them being autistic. Now, if that's a common experience, and to be honest, I haven't checked if that's typical, but that's imposing a burden that didn't used to exist, and I can't explain it. Some people have thought the growth in autism may be just a question of us being better at diagnosing the situation or the children. But I suspect that nothing like that was occurring 30 years ago. And today the school system has to accomplish, they have duties that they have to accomplish that are quite different than they were some time ago. And that we have to fund the resources to be able to do that.
Right. A teacher I know has a similar circumstance, and she said, it takes away from the other children because she has to spend so much time with this special needs child, but also she does not have the training to adequately look after them in a proper way.
Exactly.
And she feels bad about that.
Yep. And, I think, again, this is an element of modern life, but parents are more likely to be working and unable to do certain elements that the old single, when only one parent was working in the family, then that today schools are looked upon by people as they're providers of childcare that perhaps people in the homes used to provide previously. If you look at before school care and after school care, it's going to create an economic burden on the system, but the fact is that families need that kind of assistance for the modern way of life.
Norm, is there anything else you want to talk about today, or have we really run down a lot of subjects?
Well, I think, the BC Hydro situation is something that I've spent a lot of time. If people go to my Insights website, that they will be able to read an awful lot of stuff about BC Hydro. I've talked about demand, but I've also talked about the fact that that the private power situation has turned. It was actually something that was designed back in the after the turn of the century, where they expected to be able to export power to the U.S. and profitably. And so governments made a huge commitment to encourage private power producers. And now we've got a situation where we've contracted to acquire this power, some of it for up as much as 15 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's just being sold as surpluses to our own needs at 3 cents a kilowatt hour. I calculated that our losses in that respect are something like $750,000 a year on average over the last 5 years. And it's going to continue in the foreseeable future. And that's resulted in fairly significant increases in BC Hydro rates that impose a burden on not only homeowners but small and medium-sized businesses. The power to the very large users like mining companies and so on has not seen the kinds of price increases that the smaller users have experienced. But, these are kinds of things where if a business has to pay a higher electricity bill, because of these rate increases, it's not doing their business any value. It's not providing any value. It's simply increasing the cost. And I fear that BC Hydro's accounting has also been used to hide the losses that have been incurred on the basis of we now have something like, it's almost $7 billion of deferrals on the books of BC Hydro. Those are, in effect, phony assets that have to be written off at some point. BC Hydro has been booking revenues that it hasn't yet earned. It's been deferring expenses that turned out to be higher than they had projected. And so because they're not following standard accounting principles in preparing their financial statements, they've given the appearance that they're in much healthier condition than they are. And that has a huge potential impact on us over the next few years because, again, it's one of those situations that's not sustainable. The use of deferral accounts has been typically used by utilities to smooth out short-term variations in the operations, but BC Hydro has been using it to distort the financial reporting that they've been doing. And I think it's a really serious situation that hasn't been discussed. The other factor that I've spent some time looking at is the decrease in revenues that we've received from gas production in British Columbia, despite the fact that the volumes are much higher today than they were 15 years ago. We're receiving substantially less money in the way of royalties. And we have also had programs that are very little talked about, but they're subsidy programs whereby the province agrees to waive, or at least provides credits that can be used to reduce royalty payments. And in one of the years recently, we actually went into a negative situation related to these credits, infrastructure credits that the government has given gas producers. And they, again, in a distortion of typical accounting systems, the province owes money to gas producers for these credits, but does not record it on the books. And that amount is over $2.1 billion that's owed to the gas producers. So we've had a really poor revenue flow from the royalties on natural gas, and that's likely to continue. In addition, the amounts of money that the province has received in granting exploration and production rights on the gas fields has been, over the last 5 years, rather low, particularly compared to the preceding 5 years. So there perhaps is something that the province can do to improve the revenue flow from natural resource development. But again, it's one of those things where they can't move too quickly because of the unintended consequences that may result. But there's a lot of that stuff at my website, and people are going to be able to see some of the detail. The work or the numbers that I produce are drawn from documents that are published by the province or by the utilities. And so I think you'll find that it's all fairly well-founded in fact.
Norm, thank you so much for chatting with us.
You're welcome.
My guest has been Norm Farrell, his website insights.ca. If you have any questions for Norm or our other guests, you can email us at info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.